I'm doing really fast. If you're not there, please get there in your handout. And we are doing the third of the sessions, the elements, the segments. But I'm wondering if there is a takeaway from yesterday that you think something's going to serve you. You're going to think about it in the weeks ahead, or a clarifying question you would like to ask to kind of get those juices flowing again. And we have the sun setting here, and it's just at the right angle that it's right on my office, but that'll change as, of course, and it'll get darker. We'll have to turn on the lights. But is there anything from yesterday? If you recall, we talked about teacher-student ethos or relationship, and we talked about really directly dopamine, motivation, and tenacity. Is there any element from yesterday, if you need a cheat sheet, look through your handout, that you think you might carry forward, or a question you want to ask, just like we mentioned there? Not to be too repetitive, but yes, I'm repeating myself.
Well, I did put together a checklist for them. We're going to do an invertebrate slideshow, and I put together the checklist for them. And I know it takes some training, but they just kind of, when I asked, and then I asked some questions too, which I usually do. I'm always like, well, why? And I just got the shoulder shrug, but I think I'm finished. So I don't know how to get them to get past that.
Well, what was your goal? What are you trying to make sure they learn?
Well, they have to find out if their invertebrate had sensory organelles, that they, how they can sense other things in their environment, if they're endangered or not, those kinds of things that they needed to look up. And they'll look it up and they'll find the 1 or 2 word answer, and then they're done. So
you were doing just basically a treasure hunt,
yes.
an Easter egg hunt.
Yes.
To do that. And where did the why come in? They have to find out why that's true or something, or why
yes, they have to find out why they would have different types of sensory organs. And then a couple of them pick like jellyfish that have no brain. So they said, well, we're done then. So, I mean, they're 10.
So now we need an application step, because that was just information gathering.
Right.
And then presenting to you, satisfying the teacher's hoop through which I jump.
Right.
You're asking me to do a task. I fulfilled the task. I guess I'm done. So now we've got to figure out a way for them to think divergently about it, or make connections of some sort, or take their favored elements from each of the different animals to design a brand new animal that could adapt readily to this environment or that environment, or Mars, or underwater, or deal with pressure and salinity factors, or whatever it might have been that you're trying to create as we prepare for our trip to Mars, or whatever it might be. But there's got to be some kind of ultimate application, not just gathering data. And then, of course, how do we make that meaningful? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that today.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, also to recode, to code something I'm learning in school in terms of something I already understand. So why are we doing all this classifying with different attributes? How does that apply to what I know? And sometimes I've actually started with Yu-Gi-Oh and Pokemon, or whatever is the latest rage with the classification, and then suddenly they're all in. They're all trying to mix and match and do these various things. And no, that's a variant, and here's why it's a variant. But that was adapted because they lived near the volcanic area, a lot of sulfur, whatever it might have been.
Yeah.
And they argue, and that's cool.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I've only been in the 4th grade for 3 years, and I'm coming from 8th grade. So I'm trying to figure out how to not dumb it down, but
still make it their level. Yeah.
What
you're trying to do is respect the learner. That's perfect. I want to honor you where you are. I want to make this doable, but I also want to make sure there's substance, and that it's demanding and challenging as well.
Yeah.
I would agree that, there's also a sense of indoctrination. We're so often told what to do and exactly what to do it. So we did your task, now what? And they really can't think for themselves. So that will take some training too.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Other question, concern, or something you want to carry forward from yesterday?
Rick, I'm gonna borrow this triggers a dopamine slide on
Good.
altering the release for my faculty meeting tomorrow, and kind of go through and see if we can share out. My teachers will share out examples of when they already know they do this, and see if we can kind of just grow our toolbox there.
Yeah, I mean, so like that long list on the right side, the part 2 of it, all those different things that release dopamine.
Yeah.
How can we incorporate that in an otherwise very boring, unengaging lesson?
Yeah.
That would be a great goal, a great use of a faculty meeting.
It'll be good because I think they've all got good ideas, and it's just kind of providing that platform that they can share what's working for them in this unique environment.
Yeah. If you guys ever need for turnaround training, any of the slides, like the full color ones, I can send you a few here and there. It's just the file is massive because there are just under 500 slides between part 1 and part 2. So, and there's embedded videos and there's high-res graphics and there's student work I'm not allowed to send. But if there's a segment, like I really want to show those slides, I can send it to you, or I can at least just send you the PDF or the non-PDF of the handout. And then you can put whatever backgrounds and coloring you want in there. It's just PDFs by themselves. You can't change anything. So if you think it's boring and black and white, let me know and I'll send you either the handout as a regular PowerPoint or the colorful slides if you like them.
Okay, great. I will email you when I have a chance to review it. Thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah. Anybody else have a question or something you want to carry forward? All right. Well, hearing nothing but crickets, we'll go ahead and get started with today. Make sure you have this slide there. And if anything comes to mind, you have a question, please put it in the chat box or just unmute. Looks like there's only 3 of us today. So if we do anything as a breakout room, we will be our own breakout room. I'm just saying. You don't need to have a breakout room of 1. Where you talk to me, myself, and I, so to speak. All right. So let's pause for a moment. And thanks, Will. I got a thumbs up. Pause for a moment. And if you're a building leader, it doesn't matter. You still need to answer the question. I come by and you're in the classroom, let's pretend. And I say, well, prove to me you're developmentally appropriate. When I ask that question around the United States and some places around the world, I get this, what the what? Well, what do you mean? What do you mean I'm developmentally appropriate? Of course I'm effective and no, prove to me, show me in a lesson plan where your expertise in 3rd graders, 4th graders, high schoolers is coming to the forefront and how your lesson designs, your assessment, the way you interact with students is manifesting that expertise based on the place in the world, culture, the age, the way the mind learns. What would you say to that particular question? So let's just think for a minute. Any example come to mind that is an indicator of a teacher being developmentally appropriate for the students he, she, they serve? It can be from your experience or observed from others or what you imagine right here in the moment. What would be proof that they were developmentally appropriate? I'll need at least 2 different examples.
What about using a document camera and showing them?
So then I would say, hey, document camera, how is that developmentally appropriate? So what is it about 4th graders or 8th, whatever it might be, and how is a document camera meeting their specific unique nature and their learning needs? You'd have to connect those dots.
Because I can use their textbook or their consumable, and I can be writing in it as we go along, and then they can try by themselves.
Why is that developmentally appropriate? What grade level are you talking about? 4th grade?
4th grade, not 8th grade, 4th grade.
4th grade. Why is that so helpful to 4th graders?
Because they need to have it modeled.
So modeling. So here, I know that 4th grader mind, they like to have some complex things, some multi-step things modeled for them, and then they need a chance to practice it. So here in my lesson, I happen to be using the tool, a document camera, is where I do that. And I'm using the same resources they will reference their textbook when they actually do it. That's the connection we want to see. So that's a great example of doing that. I know this about children that I teach, so I chose to do this. All right. Can you come up with another one, Cindy, or Hang, or Will? Do you have one that you can offer? Tone of voice. How is tone of voice developmentally appropriate, Will?
Sorry, unmuting. Yeah, I'm thinking of a kindergarten teacher I was trying to work with, and both her tone and actual words of sarcasm in a kindergarten classroom. And
Misplaced?
trying to talk about kids not being able to process sarcasm until even as they're still developing into high school.
Yeah, and I would just as a sidebar, I don't think sarcasm has any place in any classroom, even in high school. It's really diminishing motivation. Even though students might laugh occasionally, it actually pushes students farther away from a teacher. So just a word to the wise, you probably already knew that. But yeah, it's the use of sarcasm. So tone of voice. So that's a little bit different than sarcasm. I guess you can have a sarcastic tone of voice. Yeah. What, did I stutter? What do you not understand of what I just said? I guess you could do that. That would be, yeah, a tone of voice. Yeah, absolutely. How about this though, the reverse? The teacher in primary levels who's now moved up to middle school or high school and still is, class, would you like to try this, or would you like to try this? 1, 2, 3, listen to me. 1, 2, we listen to you. That's what I want you to do. Ninth graders, the ninth graders are like, oh my gosh, who is this lady? Who is this person? Talking about that. I've seen that reverse, where somebody is much more in the cadence of working with very young kids, making sure you draw things out a little bit for the correct pronunciation, and you're bringing everybody along for the ride. You're not losing anyone. And then they try to do that in high school, and it's like, no, it's so insulting. Don't do that. So yeah, that would be a mismatch. And so you're saying tone of voice could be a way of demonstrating your expertise. So the question is, do we have expertise in how the brain learns of an 8-year-old or an 18-year-old? Do we have expertise in the culture of the community? We have a heavy Vietnamese community, a heavy impoverished community. Are there some generalized things? We don't want to generalize too much because people are very different. Heterogeneity exists within homogeneous communities. I know that sounds really weird, but yes, it's very rarely a perfectly uniform, everybody's like that, everybody's like this, when you talk about a group of people. But nonetheless, there are some places where we can respect where they're coming from, and that could be a part of what we do in the classroom. And they have a seat at learning's table, so to speak. So as we go through this, a reminder from the last session we did that we do have implicit biases. We do have a sense of narrative in ourselves and what is normal, what's not normal. That microaggression stuff, we overly promote our own worldview, what's included, what's not included, that sort of thing, as we are ending up a little bit yesterday. But even before the pandemic, these things were happening. And we have to help students navigate this part of their lives. Families previously functional, now dysfunctional, that sort of thing. But now with the pandemic, this stuff has been exploded and exacerbated. So please just remind yourself of these things. I'll give you a silent moment. We might not have expertise in some of those things. That doesn't mean we say, oh, well, my hands are tied, there's nothing I can do. We would seek the advice of others. Find a way to facilitate that person getting that addressed, if at all possible. We're trying to make sure, remember about equity? Equity is one of the definitions is you remove any barriers to learning, any hurdles, any challenges that would prevent access or proper demonstration of learning and so on, because you see the child as infinitely valuable and that your ideas help navigate all of that. To pull this off, I think you have to become more deeply aware or a mini expert, however you want to frame that, in the challenges or the characteristic elements of the students you serve. We are not teaching blind to the students we serve. Our goal is, the highest calling is to serve. We find meaning and connection that ourselves, otherwise there's probably not enough in our careers to keep us invested in our own teaching, because we have to really see the service elevating of others is, where we are called to help. But you've got this picture of this one child, and that's going to stay consistent, the same, constant. But in the left, the yellow descriptive labels, students who, that kind of thing, is going to change. And I'm just going to rotate through them as you watch down there. Be mindful of the child that is watching you, that is so worldly, with the world map painted on his face. And there's a whole series of these images on Google Images if you want to get some more and use them in your classroom. But now look to the left. Our first category there, you see? Yeah, students who are ELL, English language learners. What do we know about teaching them in a regular class? And so I might know this, and if I don't know it, I need to read a few books and get the expertise. And then you should be able to ask me, where is that expressed in my instruction? You've got to make the connection. You can't just learn the stuff and go right in and do what you're going to do anyway. All right, here we go. So looking in the left-hand corner, here's one category, and then I'm going to switch silently through the rest. Let's take a look. Oops, sorry. I've had to do that. So now let's put it to the test. I'm going to give you characteristics of a subgroup within the groups that we teach. Looking at these different slides, let's try to identify at least 5 of them and what we might do differently for them in the course of instruction, assessment, or the way we interact that would prove that expertise. That's the basic idea, and we'll just do this together, all right? So one of the subgroups in classes is gifted, accelerated, advanced students. We need to meet their needs just as much as we meet the needs of the students who are very deeply challenged by something. So here's the first of like 4 or 5 slides. We'll do one per slide. All right. So look through these 5 different elements, factors, and try to identify one and say, all right, if I knew that, here's how I might change something I do to meet that need. That's all we're asking. All right, take a look. Give it a shot. First one up to bat. And welcome, Debbie. All right, you've kind of had a chance to glance over them. Anyone there kind of speak to you like, okay, here's how I might respond to that?
I'm thinking about vocabulary
What about it?
and the appreciation of maybe this is a suggestion, a little bit gifted with language. And my 8th grade teacher, instead of like she's doing reading and journaling, she
Yeah.
offered a couple students to work on like writing a story. So one's kind of continued kind of writing a novel. So would that kind of fit what you're thinking of?
Well, it depends. You would start out saying the word vocabulary, but I heard different types of writing, but I didn't really hear the vocabulary difference. So the idea they have an unusually large vocabulary with complex sentence structures. So you could write a novel, but it could have, very simplistic sentence structures and low vocabulary. So where's the vocabulary element in that?
I don't know, maybe I'm more just stretching just in terms of language and maybe
literacy or, in general.
Yeah.
Well, unusually large vocabulary. So we would encourage them to develop that. They might have literally a different word list to learn if teachers are teaching vocabulary than somebody else. They might be encouraged to use unusual sentence structures. So for example, a paragraph could be a single word. So in a fiction writing, you're a paragraph, this is the story. And then suddenly the next paragraph, it's indented, but it's one word. And it's the word fear, period. And other students like, what? That's not like a paragraph, it's one word. But actually, technically, it suffices a paragraph. And I would allow that. They could mix and match simple sentences combined into compound sentences or complex sentences, moving subordinate clauses around to emphasize different things. The playfulness of that, I might invite them to do a little bit more of that. What are 15 ways to say the exact same thing? Jeremy ate pizza. Jeremy sank his teeth deep into the pie and grease ran down his chin. That's one. All right, what's the second way to do that? Oh, this is cool. How do I do that? But you have to keep the same truth that Jeremy, this kid named Jeremy, ate pizza. But you can like embellish, you can do all kinds of things. Debbie's writing, she would offer them opportunity to create metaphors within the content. For example, how is a fraction like a broken window? Yeah, absolutely. Metaphors and analogies. I wrote an entire book on that. I love that. We'll talk more about that coming up. But yeah, you're spot on. Rapid learner, one of the things that teaches me, I'm not going to belabor the point. I'm not going to, a lot of teachers make the mistake of saying the same thing 3 or 4 different ways. And I realize I may not need to do that as quite as often as those folks, or demand as lengthy or repetitive a practice because they got it after the first time. And I could probably safely assume with excellent memory that they will recall things we did a few weeks ago. I don't have to worry about reteaching things. See how something here would inform what you do and change what you do with them? Let's go to the next slide. Choose one and give an example of how it could be expressed and how you might adjust instruction, assessment, or interaction. Looks like my phone is going off. I'm going to turn that off here. All right. Anybody have one? Based on one of these here. Yeah, just give logic puzzles. Now, regular kids would like that, but you might have, more advanced ones. That's okay. You might turn something you're teaching into more of a logic reasoning puzzle. Teach them actually systems of logic, the 25 most common fallacies, add straw man fallacy, false dichotomy fallacy, things like that. And then they can employ that in their arguments. Yeah, that would be great. I'm also reminded in the third and fourth one that they might be quite advanced academically, but emotionally, they may not be at that same level. And I can't presume an emotional maturity that is equivalent to the academic maturity or proficiency. And just remind myself that they're children first, gifted, accelerated, advanced second. Okay. Anybody else have one? I got 2 more slides of these, so I want to make sure we get a chance to look at them. All right, let's do this one here. You choose one, and then you identify how it would be manifest in your lesson design or assessment or interaction. Debbie writes, have students brainstorm solving a real world problem, like one of the millennium problems. Yeah, I'd love that. And then the logical sequence, if we chose this, what might be the result? Extrapolate out. And if we chose this, what might be the result? And how can we use wisdom born from looking at that to inform or revise this thing over here? Woo, that's good stuff. That's Rhodes Scholarship stuff. Anything here and how you would incorporate it in what you do? iMovie, a social justice issue. Yeah, it's using media too, and some of their autonomy and creativity. I think that's a great idea. But just a basic idea that, hey, when I'm teaching this, is there any way I can involve a justice cause? The kids will get so much more motivated. They'll be all in. They're fighting for a cause that, that's important to them. Yeah, I can probably do that a heck of a lot more. They want to protect the playground, so they redesign a playground using scale drawings and mathematics to prove a point that they can be more efficient with materials or something, and then present it to the local school board or board of supervisors. There's a cause, I'm fighting for it. That's actually really good. I love this one, preoccupied with their own thoughts. They daydream a lot. So what it means is I need to be a little bit more patient rather than curt, and understand this is actually quite natural for a student who's accelerated to be in flow, and pull them back to what we're doing, give them tools, an executive function. How do I pull you back and let you understand when do you really need to focus and pay attention, and when is that rude and when is it not? And then just be nice about it when I'm bringing them back rather than cranky. Yeah, I can do that. Absolutely.
Rick, for the daydreamer.
Yeah.
So let's say we're trying to be patient and we bring them back. But how do we just try to find out their interests and then support them and kind of get them side projects off of that?
Well, I got to tell you, the first presumption or assumption that you want to make is that daydreaming isn't bad. It can actually be a very good thing. They can be thinking of some really good tangentially connected thoughts, and that led to this and that led to that, and great inventions, great mini epiphanies have occurred throughout civilization. Everyday consumer products, advances in law, advances in science and technology and math have happened because of daydreamers. So we always get to say, hey, you're off task, you're daydreaming. The first idea is that this could be actually a cool thing. And what did we almost squelch and shut off, diminish, because we were so antsy and so upset about daydreaming? So don't always think it's bad. In fact, I want more teachers just to pause and daydream a little bit about possibilities in learning and education. And it turns out it's very invigorating for a lot of people who might be feeling a little stale in their careers. So that's the first thing. But we also want to say, all right, you've got somebody who's, this lesson is obviously not punching your buttons. It's not lighting you up. So there's a thing in the world of differentiation, which is kind of what we're talking about here, called orbital or satellite studies. And they're tangentially connected to what we're doing, but you can still teach the same standards, or at least most of them. For example, students who have moderate autism, like Asperger's, they actually can be quite gifted. So you can be twice and thrice exceptional. So I could have a very accelerated, advanced, mature person who has Asperger's. And I remember one time I was teaching All Quiet on the Western Front by Remarque, the classic novel, and they just were not into it. But what they were fascinated by, and truly in Asperger's, you become a legitimate expert. This is not fantasy. They really are quite the expert in this, because they really dig down and they get the real stuff, not made up conspiracy stuff. They're really into it. And this student of mine was really into toxic warfare in the trenches of World War I, which is when All Quiet on the Western Front takes place. So I took her, this is a girl, I took her out of the novel studies and the unit we were doing. She read nonfiction and soldiers' testimonies and stories about the poisonous gases used in trench warfare. And she really got to become an expert and came back and taught the class. And via the readings she did and the historical analysis, I was actually able to hook and teach all the stuff I really was going to teach. And she was now focused on that. So if I take the daydream and it's going a different way, I might lean into that daydream and see where it takes us, because it could be quite positive. Now, are they going to be daydreaming like making a contraption, or when you release it, it flies up and sticks in the ceiling, made of paper clips? Yes, that's going to happen. But maybe what I do is I say, look, I see that. That's actually really cool. I love that. I'd even like to sit with you and make some myself. So how about we do this? We focus on this for 15 minutes, and then we come back and try this again. Then we do this 15 minutes, then we come back. I can try some negotiation from time to time, but I do need to honor that world of exploration and free flow daydreaming, because it really is critical to a heck of a lot of happiness, motivation, and outright substantive innovation. And we don't want to squelch any of that. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Anybody else have one there from the list? All right, let's go crazy. Let's do the last slide. Anything here, and you could say, and here's how I would change it in a lesson plan or interaction or assessment.
Well, the interest in experimenting, that's where you could do STEAM, or stream. Just give them a bunch of things and tell them to try to, like I did one time, gave them all kinds of different things and said, now make a parachute that can hold this. And
Right.
they came up with some really creative things to have that parachute.
Yeah, it's kind of like in middle schools that do the egg drop as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that.
I did the egg drop where they could only, they had Scraby bucks and they could only spend $10 and they had to buy their materials. And you have the kids who spend all of it at once and the kids who don't. And that was pretty fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's almost a life lesson too, in some areas. I love that. From one of my own students, I was teaching Shakespeare's 18th sonnet. You might remember that as, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. And it goes on from there. And it's about a person being in love with somebody else and comparing them to a summer's day. So the students were studying parts of blood, red cells, white cells, plasma, platelets, and so on. And I said, look, using Shakespeare's structure of the 18th sonnet, I want you to be in love with one part of blood and connect it to another part of blood, one of the elements of it. But you have to be accurate for the science of the parts of blood and accurate, have fidelity to the structure of the 18th sonnet. And I don't know if you're aware, but red cells are small, rounded, dented like little Cheerios, and they don't have a nucleus in the mature stage. White cells are large and blobby and do have a nucleus. And I remember one of my students' first two lines, shall I compare thee to a white corpuscle? Thou art more pinched and have no brains. And it went on from there. But it was a great integration of puts idea or things together that are not typical. So there's that, the metaphors as well, let alone just absurd connections that actually really hold up under scrutiny. So any others? We've had two here, one from me, one from Cindy. So Hang, you can type yours in. Debbie, you can type or just unmute, or Will.
I'm not sure I'm doing this right or what you're thinking of. We've got
at least you're venturing forth.
This sense of humor.
Yeah. What about it?
So we do a Monday or Tuesday morning, like assembly. We're Catholic school, so mass and assembly. And at the end, I was doing a dad joke of like a dad joke of the day.
Sure.
But then what I noticed is some of the students were guessing. And so I've got one in third grade. No, yeah, he's in third grade now. And he's one of my regular guests where he presents the dad joke of the day.
Oh, okay.
But I'm not sure where to go with that afterwards.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking more rather than an assembly. So in a sense, you're performing the humor, that you find a way just to incorporate gentle humor in what's going on. For example, if you take a piece of paper, I'll get to your comment there in a minute, Debbie. If you take any 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and you just kind of twist it in the middle and it creates, kind of a bow tie effect, I'll pull that down. So now when I'm having a conversation that I'm portraying to the class between a father and a daughter, when I have it here, it's the father wearing a bow tie talking. When I have it here, it's the girl with the bow in the hair. So I change my voice. So what are you doing today after school? I want to know that you are, doing your studies. Daddy, why do you keep asking me about my homework? Well, I just care about you, pumpkin. Well, I don't know. What the kids are waiting for is me to screw up and forget which voice goes with which place. And now the daddy's talking about what I really care about. But it was a simple prop and it was a little bit of humor. So I know that I'm frozen. You guys see me okay? Am I frozen? Or am I back? Okay.
You're back.
Okay, thank you. Once in a while, because the storms in the middle of the country, it's been freezing this afternoon, just so you know, into the evening. If it gets really bad, I will switch to a tethering hotspot and we'll see if that works a little bit better. But we've had storms here and there's huge storms between us, between the two coasts, because I'm in the DC area, if you recall, and you are in the West Coast. At any rate, I have a segment coming up on really good ideas for incorporating humor, because that's incredibly motivating. It's also relaxing. I don't have to be as anxious, and I will engage in what's in front of me. So there are probably more ideas for you there, but I think it's okay to have a joke of the day. A story now, it doesn't mean it's always a riddle. It could just be a funny story. And students getting up and developing poise, public speaking, to be able to tell that joke with that poise, that cadence, the punchline, that's actually a part of learning. That's actually very maturing, even for older kids. So I think you're great to do that. But know this, that for advanced kids, even slapstick humor, like slipping on a banana peel, is unusually funny. They really, really find humor compelling. So not just cerebral parody, satire, or a really clever pun. I mean, even clown-like stuff. It's just more appealing. And so if you had a lesson that was devoid of humor and funniness of life, laughing at ourselves, laughing at the situation, whatever it is, I'm going to say you're developmentally not very motivating and you're not appropriate for advanced students. Does that make sense? Oh my gosh, Debbie, I love this. I had never thought of that. Look what she wrote in the chat box. Thanks for the thumbs up there, Will. Mirror poems. The poem makes sense read in both directions, but perspective changes depending on the direction it's read. Woo, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. Wow, could that be really good? I like that very much. Cool. All right, any others? All right, no worries. We're good. Folsom Prep, welcome aboard. Now, as we mentioned before, this is one of my favorite definitions of equity, the idea of meeting those needs. So look what we've highlighted in green. All individuals are infinitely valuable. So I don't find my time with you less preferable than my time over there or whatever it is. My affinities put to one side, I have an affinity for all the students. Time in their company is time well spent. But also I'm all about removing any injustice, any obstacle, any challenge that would prevent them access to learning or presentation of their learning, an accurate portrayal of that. This is part of equity. And that means I do different things with different students, some or a lot of the time. It does not mean I'm equal. So just a reminder, you better pray I'm fair, not pray that I'm equal or the same. So when you say something is fair, that doesn't mean you're doing the same thing for all the kids. You cannot say as a teacher, well, that wouldn't be fair to the rest of the class if I did that for that one child. Of course it would. The rest of the class didn't need it. So again, more time, less time, different methodology, all of that. Well, one of the biggest things you can carry forward from this is to please remember, the brain is a self-preservation survival organ. Seriously, in terms of dignity and energy. And when I say energy, I mean literally sugar, glucose, glycogen. If I, in a way, you best learn, you're not expending a lot of glucose. It's much more efficient. But if I'm teaching a way you don't best learn, you're spending all kinds of sugar and glucose and it's high energy. And the brain wants to self-preserve. So it will shut down. It will try to escape. It won't be motivated. Basically, I'm saying this. If I teach in the way you best learn, I can take you to the moon. You'll move mountains in that class. Not that I'm about control or compliance, but it's almost like I'm the master puppeteer. You're going to go along for the ride. You have no choice but to follow. But if it's a class that doesn't differentiate, is not responsive to what we know individually about the students, it's very easy for that student to avoid, escape, illegally text, become distracted by other things because the brain is just trying to survive in terms of energy output and dignity. And so I'm going to implore you to see this as your job is looking at your instruction to maximize the learning based on what you know about the kids. If you're struggling with the topic, but I know that you're into basketball, I might come up with some basketball analogies and suddenly you'd have a mini epiphany. I get it now. But I'm not going to pigeonhole. I'm not going to say, I can only teach through basketball metaphors. Otherwise, you'll never learn. No, they're very resilient. I could use fishing metaphors. I could use some cartoon that's popular right now, and they would totally get it. But for those times when it's just not working, or I think I could improve the meaningfulness, the long-term memory, what do I know about the child that allows me to do that better? So English language learners, children that are dealing with homelessness, or whatever it is there anything in a factor, the characteristics of their learning that will allow me to do it? So I'm going to hope that you're going to get into these verbs to take them to the moon. You're going to differentiate, tier, and scaffold, which is adjusting the level of support and readiness as they're taking different stepping stones to get to eventual proficiency. You're going to advance, you're going to adjust pacing and not limit kids to a uniform timeline, which goes against all we know in human psychology. You're going to be gently insubordinate to the school's timeline, taking longer time, less time, depending on the needs of the kid. You're going to extrapolate and you're going to ignite this rocket and really launch it out there. So basically, there are a lot of teachers, and this is me when I found a stuffed moose in Maine, and my wife likes moose, so I didn't find a live one, but I was looking. That's all I found in a hotel lobby. But anyway, I have a scrunched up weird face, and it looks like I'm almost wearing the same shirt, but I'm not. At any rate, a lot of teachers see I am delivering knowledge. I am the oracle, drink thirstily from my faucet. I am the arbiter of all there is to know. You'll be prepared by listening and learning from me. That's old school. We need to see what we present as a launch pad for students' own investigations, because our goal is this: let me get out of your way and not limit you to my sorry imagination. Can you imagine if the people we all teach only learn what we in this room know? Civilization will stagnate. We will grind to a halt. If you're worth your salt, so to speak, as a teacher, your students will transcend you. Problem? I am guilty of teaching students so they got equal to me, and then it was time for the test. Oh, that's a good question, but discuss that next year. Now back to what we know. I got uncomfortable. No, the goal is they surpass us not get equal to us. You'll take science farther than I could ever take science. You'll write a better paragraph than I could ever write at your age or even older. That's my goal, is to get out of their way and not limit them to my sorry imagination. So that could be scary because it means you're teaching in ways they learn, not the way you learn, and they might get beyond you. But what if you use that lens? I'm a facilitator of the journey. I am not the arbiter of that. I facilitate where they go, give them tools so they make constructive use of time, energy, and focus. Yeah, I can do that, but I do that by knowing you. I'm sharing the path with you. I'm not saying you have to be at this point. This can be overwhelming for some teachers or a little bit challenging at first. I'm asking you to be so versatile, large repertoire. You're able to move in the moment, be very flexible in your response, right? A sense of pedagogical agility. If that is something where you, I don't know, thinking divergently, Rick, I'm not so sure. If it bothers you, you might want to consider feeding your intellectual soul. We had such a concern about this because if you teach the same thing year after year, you tend to get complacent, and creativity can atrophy if you don't feed it. Intellect can atrophy if you don't feed it. So we started a committee, and I was one of the co-chairmen, the Intellectual Life of Teachers. And here in the Washington, D.C. area, we have a lot of museums, and we have a lot of training institutes and schools, but we also have a lot of musicians who do instruction. We have the American Contract Bridge League that will teach you how to play the card game of bridge. We have a lot of gamers. If you want to learn Minecraft as an adult, or whatever it is you want to do. If you want to learn Chinese cooking or baking bread, it's a really educational focused area. So what we did is we went to the Smithsonian and National Geographic and the Library of Congress, and we said, look, we really want to improve schools. And that means teachers need to be innovative and creative, and they need to experience that. So we need to feed their intellect. The classes you offer, would you give us those classes at 90% off? And we'll pay the other 10%, but these are for teachers and the local employees who work at the museum and so on. And they agreed, a lot of them agreed, not all, but a lot. So we found instructors who would teach you guitar. And what we told teachers was this: you have to, if you choose to do any of these things, it has to be something that has nothing to do with your curriculum. So if there's no guitar in your music program, we'll give you guitar lessons. If you are somebody who doesn't teach the Civil War, but you want to go take a course on the Civil War or submarines or something, just to feed your soul, we'll pay for it. But it can't be something that's actually in your curriculum. And because it basically is about you becoming a student, creating empathy for other students in your class, right? But also about you stretching your mind and making more connections, thinking divergently, feeding that intellectual soul. So if you're interested, I wrote an entire article on this. You see me listing it there down below. I will send you the various things that we did. I have a whole set of slides on that if you want me to ever send you the slides. But wow, did it improve differentiated instruction in the classroom? Because teachers just had this idea of, oh, I'm about their learning, not about me presenting and getting through the curriculum. And if they don't learn this way, I've got 8 other ways I can teach it. In other words, it was invigorating for the teacher. And of course, that translates and becomes very engaging to the students. I had different opportunities. If I didn't learn one way, I could do it another way. Rather than blaming the child for his lack of caring or follow through on a responsibility when I'm the one that's trained in how the mind best learns. That makes sense? Anybody have a question about that or a comment? So I could send you the slides, but you'd have to email me, or I'll send you the article, your choice. You let me know. All right. So this is all building up, and I have a really cool special effect right now. Took me a long time to design this. Ready? Ding! There it is, green circle. This is the definition of responsive teaching, differentiation, and so on. Give it a read. See if it's okay, if there's a question you want to ask me about one element of it. But this is what we're trying to embody in the sequence so far. Take a look. Okay, So notice it creates versatility. I teach you 9 different ways to take notes, not one, and say, I'm adamant you have to use it. I teach you, a variety of ways so you become your own advocate. You're sitting in a stadium seating college classroom later on. Professor is a tiny little speck on the stage down below. Nobody's differentiating for you, but you know what? I learned in school that I learn best by talking outside my skull. So I'm going to find 4 or 5 other college classmates here who we can go to the student center and sit down and kind of go over our notes from the 3-hour lecture on a Thursday night. And yeah, we might have some snacks or something, but we can kind of go over what we thought we heard. We heard from the professor, make sure we're on the same page for like half an hour, 45 minutes. And then that's it. I can advocate, assert for myself if I have this kind of versatility, which is what happens. So notice differentiation isn't teaching the way they best learn all the time. It's providing the tools to handle anything that is not differentiated. Any questions? All right. And don't forget, fair doesn't mean same. Fair means developmentally appropriate. Imagine me walking into the doctor's office waiting room, and I'm the doctor, and I diagnose you in the room. You've got a broken arm. You've got COVID. You've got a splinter right near your eye. How did that happen? That's weird. You've got allergies. You've got a tummy ache. You've got a stubbed toe, whatever. And all I do is go to every patient and set their arm with a cast, because that's all I know how to do. That's absurd. It's the exact same thing for a teacher to say, oh, you didn't learn it the way I taught it? Stinks to be you. We're moving on. You should have studied harder. Or you all must learn by the exact same date, or there's no hope. No, that's playing gotcha. And we're about growth. We've already talked about that in yesterday's session. And if you weren't here for yesterday's session, please try to watch it. It kind of set up a lot of things we're doing today. So I'm going to remind you about the versatility. We want to do that. And the idea that you need to kind of get up to speed on the different factors that affect student learning, both positive and negative. So what if a kid is really into anime, manga, cartooning, and graphic novels? They could do a graphic novel page. They could do a political cartoon using some of that knowledge, right? On a science idea, a math idea, a government idea, a coding idea, it doesn't matter. So that's a positive factor. But what if they're challenged because of high transiency? This is the 5th school in as many years. That's a factor I really need to consider. What if they keep coming in every morning espousing Republican talking points, or Democrat, or Tea Party, or Green Party, or whatever it might be? Politics seems to be important. I wonder if I can use that. What if the student is struggling with ADHD? What do I know about ADHD, and how does that inform what I do? You should be able to ask me any of those, and I should be able to prove, yeah, here's where it's coming out. Now, I did another article. I would be very glad to send it to you if it's not already listed in the links, but it's how do you get to know your students? What are really cool, creative ways to get to know them so you can respond in your instructional and assessment design? If that would be of value, write a little note to yourself. Hey, Rick, I'm in your seminar right now. Could I please have that article? And I'd be glad to send it to you tonight or tomorrow. One of those 2 times, you'll get it. All right. Now, this is all building up to this series, this sequence. This is the river of learning in front of you. I need to get you to subduction zones, or one plate of the Earth's crust goes against under another, causing earthquakes, volcanoes. You would know nothing about that in California. So, I grew up in San Jose, so yes, I know about that. Santa Clara County Public Schools. That's my school district when I was growing up. At any rate, you've got a student on the other side who might be challenged by something. All right. I got the class in the middle who's going through the flow of my lesson plans. What do I do? Because he's not going to learn through those methods I've already designed. One of 3 choices. First, a different methodology. We run parallel to the class. Sometimes we cross over and do the same thing the class is doing. That's fine. Then we might actually break out the other side and do something parallel. But notice where the arrow ends up, ultimately the same standard. Second choice, these pictures are supposed to depict different types and levels or degrees of support. You can do the lessons the rest of the class is doing, but you have different kinds of support, stepping stones, tools, templates to get you through that. But you ultimately end up independently being able to demonstrate proficiency. The arrow ends up at the standard. Third choice, you might need more iteration, more time, maybe work with a mentor before you actually get there. But you do get there. These are teacher methodologies and approaches. Here's the big moment. Ready? Looking at the screen. I'm going to mesmerize. Ready? Big red X. None of this has anything to do with the final grade. The teacher methods to get you there have no purpose in the final report of where you are. Why? Because a grade is a report of what you know and can do at journey's end, not the pathways you took to get there. So classwork, homework, yeah, reading log minutes, band practice minutes, brought your supplies in a timely manner, used a quiet indoor voice, had a nice neat notebook, practice personal hygiene successfully, though next time less acts. Whatever it is, it's irrelevant. And there's hope and motivation in this, because you're not going to hold me to my stumbling first steps, my intermittent coming to know. You're going to grade me on what I know and can do at the end of all the learning experiences. So when we get to grading, next week, there'll be a little reminder of this, but this is to remind you that we're about getting you there. Any concerns about that approach to assessment and grading and the idea of differentiation and trying to motivate kids? Anything come to mind like, oh, I wonder about, or it makes me concerned about? Anything?
I don't have a problem not assigning grades to homework and classwork, and I know what they can do. It's how do you get the parents past the fact that you're checking things off, but you're not necessarily putting a grade on it?
So one of the most motivating things of all, I want you guys to think back to college, and you did like a 12 to 15 page paper, and all the professor wrote on there was B+, very good. And you're going, did he or she even read it? I mean, that's really lame. The feedback is the most motivating thing. It's not the judgment. Judgment shuts down the motivation. Just saying. So I'd explain that to mom and dad. And then on homework and classwork, there would be ample feedback. And the kid is motivated. And he's using the feedback or the critique to improve learning. And it's not going to be held against him. Your earlier incompetence should never be averaged in with the current present report of great competence, because it's not evidence of competence when you're incompetent earlier. So it's going to be marked and with feedback, right? But it's not going to be a part of the summative final judgment grade. And the student's going to get feedback and be able to say, well, I understand this, but I don't understand this. Parents are usually okay once they see the students are okay with that. But they will want to know, will you be including a completion rate or average? And I think that's legitimate as a separate column. So basically what I tell parents, homework is going to count 100% of its own column. It'll count 0 on what you know about parts of a plant or types of clouds. Oh, I get it. So it's still reported. You can have positive, negative consequences for doing homework according to the average or the rate of it. That's fine. But I'm not going to let a kid, and I just explained this to mom and dad, if I'm giving a report on what you know about types of clouds or whatever it is, adding fractions with different denominators, whatever it might be, I'm not going to cloud that report or distort it with reportive evidence of something else, because that will knowingly fudge it higher or lower. That's called conflation. I'm not going to conflate the report of one thing with the report of something else. It's so much more beneficial to you, mom and dad, when you get an accurate report, not a distorted report. Now, there's a lot more hope for kids because they could be really kind of crummy coming to know, but they eventually get there. But now you're going to weave in all their crummy stuff. So they have an A, that's great, but you're going to weave in where they didn't do homework and now they have a C. Where's the hope in that? I can't overcome my immaturity right now in the moment. There's no hope for me, and you're going to hold me to my digressions. There's no way for me to get beyond them. Why bother? So the grading thing is a big deal. We'll talk more about that next week too.
What do you think of verbal feedback versus written feedback? Because my kids, being 10, they won't read what I write on their paper necessarily.
Well, that's true. But I would remind you that it's good to be able to go back and reference feedback. So you can do audio file recordings on a lot of learner management systems and electronic software for grade books. So if you don't want to write or type because they won't read it or understand your cursive, you wrote sideways in the margin, and do a recording that is any parent on Parent Oracle, Parent View can go on, click on the assignment and get you talking. And your vocal inflection actually communicates a heck of a lot more than what you write. And parents will understand, they'll be able to coach their child. The student will understand it. They go, oh yeah, that's what she said, I forgot. And they're able to get back into it. I think having a record of that would be very helpful. But verbal is fine, as long as they really are gonna remember it and use it to inform next steps. Bethany writes, we've switched to standards-based grading. Yeah, I do training on that. In fact, this group, CAPS PD now, they had me do that for the past 2 years, an exact same thing, 4 half days. So if you want those recordings, go to CAPS PD now. You can talk to Candace, who's their representative and facilitator here, and say, how might I get access to those recordings? If you just want to listen to them, or invite me to do the training for your school. That's just a hint if you want to help put my kids through college. Oh, thank you. Thanks, Bethany. Any other concerns with what we just described with differentiation? All right, then a reminder. These are all the ways you can differentiate. There's 11-7 bajillion, but they'll all boil down to one or more of these. So use a hybrid of 2 or 3, but basically it's this. Starting out at the very top, working to the bottom. I could change what I literally teach you. That's content. I could change the process that we use for you to learn it. That's process. I could change the product you use to demonstrate or prove your learning. We could change the social emotional atmosphere, that's affect, and we could literally change the physical learning environment. You can use assistive technology. It's a smaller teacher-student ratio. I'm literally putting you in a part of the classroom where you're not distracted, all kinds of things. And we can do things that are combinations of these. If I ever gave you one of those triangular rubber pencil grips, because you're getting frustrated trying to take notes, it's making you mad, you're upset, your fingers are hurt, you just can't form those letters, fine motor control is an issue, whatever. But I gave you this thing and so you can keep up. Well, that affects social emotional affect. It's also the way you're learning and maybe the learning physical environment. So one thing actually encountered 3 elements, but every single thing you do will be one or more of these. I guarantee it. So I put this list in my lesson plan book every single year. And when I look at certain students, I go, what do I think I really need to adjust in order to maximize his learning over that which otherwise could be achieved? Oh, so that's something, if you need this as a catalyst, please feel free to use that. And then really close to this, how might I flexibly group? And remember that we don't say ability. We don't say ability group because that's very scary, threatening, because it's like innate. It doesn't feel changeable. But readiness is. I'm not ready, but I could become so. So we say, are you ready for these first few steps at introductory level? Or are you ready for this level of challenge? So we can group you according to different challenge levels by saying different readiness levels. We can group you according to your passions and interests, your hobbies, things where you're kind of an expert for it. And then we can group you according to learning profile. And if you remember, that was this big list here. There we go. Where, all right, all the kids who are into this or all the kids into that, I might do a little subgroup with you. That's fine. One caution, heterogeneity versus homogeneity. I have found that if you have some great strength and I put all of you together, sometimes it's too much of a good thing. And your great strength becomes a deficit. So I tend to think in heterogeneity in that I want to put at least 2 different groups together that would complement and bring out the best in each other. So if this is a strength of yours, but you have kind of weakness, I will get another group that will fill in that weakness and complement what you do. And man, powerhouse. Everybody's contributing, feels like they have a role. It works very, very well. So when we get to this slide here, those are roughly the 3 ways that we can group kids and have them motivated and involved in what's going on. We can also regroup the curriculum, re-chunk for meaning. This is the curriculum I'm teaching you. Right now, that looks like a heck of a lot of gobbledygook, right? But I say, all right, you got to learn it. I don't know how to make it meaningful. So let's just do a memory device, a mnemonic. So CP at the very beginning, I like jazz. So that's Charlie Parker. Bird, man. Yeah, Charlie Parker. Arpeed Ficka. Charlie Parker Arpeed Ficka. Charlie Parker Arpeeding? I don't know. That's just like, is that rest in peace because he's dead? Oh man, this is getting to be a joke, right? This is not good instruction. But what if I knew you so well that I was choosing connection, meaningfulness? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to not take away any letters because that would be watering down. I'm not taking away any curriculum, right? You see the analogy? But I'm simply sliding things around left and right until it's regrouped. So I'm thinking in my head, I will go to page 111 or 322. I'm not going to just follow blindly page after page after page in some textbook. I'm going to do it based on whether or not it's purposeful, based on what I know about you. So here is the exact same curriculum, but now because I know you guys, I'm framing it like this. CPR, PDF, CAPS PD now, laugh out loud. Now I know that each of you probably knows what those things are. Oh, now if I asked you to learn this stuff, you'd be able to carry it forward because it has meaningful connection. Ad infinitum, ad nauseum, you would know this stuff. Simplistic analogy, but this is what really good teachers do when they're responding to what they know about students. So think about this. What if there are 5 standards you want to teach? And this set of students, they're only ready to learn 3. If I try to jam all 5 down their throat, they'll learn none of it. So I might as well learn what we can right now. So I teach my heart out. You learn your heart out, 3 of them. And then we have a level 2 test and a level 1 test. Level 1 is just the 3 standards. Level 2 is all 5 standards. And you might be thinking, but Rick, is that not watering down of the soft bigotry of low expectations? No, because I'm going to circle back. And when we get to this meaningful context in 3 weeks, I'm going to teach those other 2 objectives. You just weren't ready for them at the same pace as everyone else. Does that make sense? If I took it out of the curriculum for the whole year, that's watering it down. But if I rearrange the curriculum, I'm still holding you accountable. And to be really honest, I'm increasing the likelihood that you'll learn all 5. Again, if I tried to jam all 5 down on the same uniform timeline, you would learn any of them. And I would be the irresponsible factor in the equation. So I was walking through Venice, Italy, and it came across a 4-story building with this art installation next to it. Look down below, you should see the tops of people's heads. Now you get a sense how big it was. Here is another angle on it. You see there's a promenade and a cafe down there? Okay. So I'm carrying a can of blue paint. And I decided that being the American I was, I would vandalize an Italian villa and paint the side of the wall. So here's what I painted on the wall. Our goal is to scaffold for students, provide lots of templates, and then pull them away. Pull it right back. Oscar Wilde said, the goal of any teacher is to put himself out of a job. So my goal is to become useless to you. Well, in my other hand, I had another can of paint, and it's paint that doesn't affect fish, and it stays on the surface of the water long enough so you can take a photo. So I painted the water of the Venetian Canal next to this villa. And the reminder is, you are moving students from being dependent on the teacher for all learning to being independent from that teacher. And that's our goal. So if I came to you and I said, how are you scaffolding for different students? You would want to show me in your lesson designs, your instructional design, how are students supported by you, and you're slowly pulling away the supports until they can do it totally individually on their own, moving towards autonomy. That's that sequence. This is the mindset of the differentiated class. Now, I thought it might be good that I wasn't just a talking head, like I laughed at earlier. What you see in front of you is me 26 years ago. I know you're thinking right now, my gosh, he did not age well. This is from ASCD's wonderful video series, and it's me, high school teachers, elementary teachers, it's K-12, and it's called At Work in the Differentiated Classroom. In this scene you're about to see, it supports what we've been talking about here. You're going to see two quick clips, and this will probably bring us up to our break time, just so you know. But first clip, Jesse. Jesse came to me and said, I don't want to take your test. And he knew that I allowed this from time to time. And I said, oh, what's your proposal, your alternative? And he said, I want to demonstrate writer's voice, because I was teaching an English class at the time, and it was about writer's voice. And I want to demonstrate it through music. But I knew he played the cello, and I knew he was ready for a challenge, a push. So I said, all right, you can do that, but it has to be classical music with no lyrics. And he said, how do you show writer's voice if there are no words? That's up to you. Now the test is going to demand this, 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 this. Do you still want to do this? And he goes, yes. He was a little stubborn. He chose Barber's Adagio. You might know that as the theme to Platoon, okay? So just know that's what he chose. And you're now going to hear an excerpt of this. Remember, it's just a segment of his essay while the music is playing in the background. And yes, it was 26 years ago. I'm using a boom box and an audio cassette tape. So no little comments. It was a long time ago. At any rate, you tell me, does he know writer's voice? I think he does. In the second clip, remember, these are both very short, is a kid named David. And my whole lesson was based on his monologue about riding roller coasters. However, the cameras are rolling, there's no script. And I asked David, so come on up here and share your monologue and riding roller coasters. And David said, no. I did not have a backup. I was an idiot. I never thought he would say no. So what did I do? Well, I want you to notice some fancy editing. In the David clip, I'm in the corner of my class walking out to the center of the room. When David says no, I magically reappear at the corner of my class, walking out to the center of the room a second time. What do you think happened 26 years ago when they filmed this? What in that in-between edits? In Virginia, we call it, we had a come to Jesus meeting. I had words with David, and I chose to do a classic instructional move, differentiated move. So they interview me on camera, and I mentioned the technique. I'm going to wave my hand or point my finger right before I say it. See if you can guess what the name of the technique is before I say it. All right, let's take a look. Oh, crank it up. It's a little soft, but it's as loud as I can get it here on my end. And see if we can kind of get some of these ideas on differentiation, responding to student differences, and increasing motivation along the way.
You will always have that guiding curriculum.
Cindy,
You always
can you
have
hear
your
okay?
eyes on the prize. It's like you have the
Okay.
compass, but the kids can help you create the roadmap by which you get there. And we get a chance to see what you have learned, to express your mastery of writer's voice, and each of you has chosen a different way to do that, some of you working in groups and some individually. In today's lesson, we started the sharing of the students' culminating activities.
Now, just so you know, there are 38 students in this 7th grade classroom. There's one Asperger's, one Tourette's. There's a whole bunch identified with learning disabilities. There's a lot of these that are ELL, and it's not just by people of color. There are white Caucasians that are English language learners. So we're not going to, fall for that stereotype. There's a category called regular ed. I'm not really sure what that means. And one last thing, on all writings in my math programs, my government programs or history class, my science class, my PE class, other classes besides just English, let alone this one. You have to write the intended audience at the top, and it can't be the teacher. It's got to be a family member, a cartoon character, a book character, a celebrity. You're explaining this to a Coast Guard member. You're explaining this to a grandfather. You're explaining this to, I remember Jack Bauer and Chloe from the TV show 24 on Fox was really popular for a long time. You're explaining this to LeBron James, that kind of thing. All right. So it increases engagement and motivation. It's a lot more fun. But can I tell you, it's way more complex and a more intellectual thing. You really have to engage if you're tailoring something to be respectful of that different audience. So in the second clip with David, what I just described has play in the overall motivation. All right, I'll be quiet. Let's take a look.
Class with the remainder of the groups. Right now,
For their culminating products, students wrote a narrative or expository essay and were given a choice among 6 projects to demonstrate their understanding of writer's voice.
Jesse, I wonder if you begin with your Barber's Adagio. You have your piece, I have your tape, and let's begin. Okay.
Barber's Adagio has an extremely strong and outstanding voice. This piece is even more mournful than the theme from Schindler's List. The first phrase introduces the theme of the piece and the tone, a sad, lost, and lonely voice full of hopelessness. The second phrase is a variation of the theme. Basically, it's saying the same thing with different notes, like a writer might say one thing in 2 different ways by using different word choice. This section gives a brief glimmer of hope, but not enough to keep the notes from sliding back into their grief-stricken melody.
When Jesse shared his background on the Barber's Adagio, I was so impressed with his choice of words. What a powerhouse. And he told me he had a thesaurus nearby and that he understood the words that he was using.
Then, in a surge of emotion with the realization that hope is never lost while there is life, the music breaks into a roaring fortissimo. Shedding its coat of anguish, the notes shout, "I am alive, and there is hope." Louder and louder, the cry reaches the soul in 4 blazing notes. Notes blazing with faith, throwing sparks of confidence. Then, as with a pause in writing at the climax, there is silence. Silence that is deafening as the notes before it. Silence that gives you a chance to start breathing again. A chance to snap back to reality. A chance to contemplate what you have just heard. Truly, the silence is as prominent as the rest of the piece.
It was a good moment. I mean, I felt stirred. And, sometimes you get goosebumps when things like that happen.
But for now, I'll just live in wonderment of the Adagio's voice.
Your reactions? David, you did a piece for us early on that was a great monologue about riding roller coasters. I wonder if you would share that with us real quickly. It's only this long. Do you feel comfortable?
No.
No? Will you come up and stand next to me? And I will read this. I will do it, interpret it. But we just want to know that you were the author, because whenever somebody else reads your work, it kind of becomes their interpretation, and I want to make sure I do it correctly. So come on up and stand next to me. This will be all right. David, as you know, or some of you know, I may not know this, he is a roller coaster enthusiast, and he's lived to tell the tale, still surviving after all his roller coaster escapades. Here, though, is what he wrote. You sure you want me to do this? You don't want to do it? All right, here it is. His audience is our fellow roller coaster enthusiasts, his age, male, talking about their obsession with roller coasters. You, my friends, are a tiny percentage of the world, but you are a different breed of human. You are the thrill seeker, the extreme thrill seeker, the one who fears nothing. I think some of their classmates saw these students who were sharing it through new eyes, because they didn't realize that quiet David had this passion for roller coasters, and that his voice could be so strong and loud in his exuberance for it, because he usually doesn't talk much in class. David is shy, and he doesn't get a lot of opportunity for the class to see how intelligent he is and how thoughtful he is. So today I needed to scaffold a bit with David. Next time that I have him up front, I'll have him read a piece and I'll read a piece. But before the end of this year, he will be up front proudly reading one of his own pieces.
So I want you to imagine something just for a moment. Imagine a student says, no, I'm not going to get up the front of the room and do my oral presentation. So what do? You go up there and the student stands silently and you read his piece or something like that, short. The next day, you read a piece of his and he reads one of yours, because it's not scary when you read somebody else's like it is when you're revealing your own thing that you created. It makes you vulnerable when you do that. The next day, so now the third day, I read one of his pieces, but maybe he reads one of his, very short. The next day, I read one of my pieces. He reads one of my pieces or somebody else's. The next day, I read a piece. He reads one of his own, a little bit longer. The next day, I am quiet, but he reads one of his pieces. The next day, I'm back at my desk like I am for everyone else, and he's reading his stuff just fine. What I could have done is this. Yeah, you get up there, it's an F, mister. And that would have shut it all down. No motivation. The teacher does not understand me. There's no ethos between us. You're not an advocate. You're just playing gotcha. Everything ruined, undermined. Or I could have said, you know what? With this child, I need to adjust the pacing, re-chunk it, baby steps, because I'm not ready for the full thing, but I'm not going to let him give up on his learning. I'm basically saying this: you will rise, but I will share the journey with you. That is such an advocacy, such a commitment. And I'm not going to let him humiliate himself. We're going to do it very gently. I might even say, look, let's try it on video. You do it at home in front of me, just by ourselves, until we think we can do it in the class. That sort of thing, whatever it takes to get to the point where they're proficient, not, oh, well, the F will teach you. Any questions about anything you saw in the video? Or an insight you might take away from it? All right. You can post it there. I will stick around. I might go get some more ice, but this is really a good time for a break. Yeah, I like the differences too. Thank you, Cindy. So if you would add 20 minutes to whatever your timepiece says and be back ready to rock and roll, that would be awesome. And I'll turn on some lights. All right, we'll see you in a little bit. Bye-bye. Things. So if you weren't attentive, oh well. With pop quiz time. As I mentioned there in the light blue, really getting to know stuff is a global waste of time, learning about the kids if you're not going to act upon it. So I'm going to ask you to act upon it. And then what that means is I started out this section actually talking about, are you developmentally appropriate? So what I want to do is, do you have an inkling of somebody else you know, or what you can imagine happening, or really it's happened with you, where you have changed instruction or assessment based on something you knew about a student or a subset of students? Anything come to mind?
I've given oral tests instead of written.
Why? What was it you found out about kids that made you do that?
This child, he could tell me everything, but if you had him write it down, he froze up and he couldn't tell me any information.
And you really weren't assessing writing, you were assessing the answers to the questions. Brilliant, just as legitimate an A as anything else would happen. Now, what if another child came and says, well, I want to do that too? What would you say?
Sure.
What if a parent said, that is not fair. My child did not get a chance to do it orally, and he might have been done better. He had to do it in writing, and he got a C. What would you say?
Well, by that point, if I'm giving a kid an oral test, or this child in particular, I don't know. Well, I'm going to go into 8th grade. When I was teaching 8th grade,
Okay.
I could read between the lines of what he was trying to say, because I taught science. So if I could read it and the gist was there, and I understood he understood it, then they got the full points. It didn't have to be perfect. It just had to be
Right.
that I had to understand. Yeah, I had to understand that they understood the process, or, if it was chemical equations, that they could, explain how to balance them, or just balance them. They didn't have to explain.
So to this parent, you might give those examples that I was chasing just the evidence. And if your child, did poorly and wants to try it again orally, maybe I'll be up for that. But I would also say what I do with other children is beyond the purview of this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm not going to comment about what I do with the kids. So what do you want to talk about? Otherwise, we're done.
Yeah.
Every single time. And that kind of happens. Parents can be pushy about this fairness thing, but I would remind them that fair means I'll do whatever it takes for a child to be successful, including yours. It doesn't mean I'm going to do the same thing. And I am asking for the same evidence, and both children were able to provide it just fine. Hen was talking about here, change IWU to UWI. UWI for Algebra 1 students.
Hi, Rick. This is Hank.
Yeah, okay. What do you mean by that?
Hey, I means the teacher. I'm the teacher who's instruct what
yes,
you're doing.
I get it.
And then we, the student, then I ask, do you all understand? And then we
Yes,
say,
perfect.
understand, then you guys do the homework. You guys do the work. But I found that it was an old, very, very old type of schools. And like why we have students who have kind of low esteem, or they are not in the math, the algebra 1 yet, but they have to push the algebra 1 based on the administrator's requirement. So what I do is I found a way that let the student know they are going to do a new lesson next day. So that so a student or a group of students will come out and talk about what they know about this lesson. And then we discuss how much do we understand, or what is, and then I'm the last one to fill up what they're missing and where to give them feedback instead of telling yes and no. And then there they start to get to learn. So I changed from that, from IVU to UVI.
Yeah, I mean, that's like constructivism to some degree. And then the question that would become, if I was a colleague working with you, is what is it you know about your students that makes you think this is a better or more effective way to teach? And
Because
how would you answer that?
I have worked with them from a certain, I won't teach them the first days or first few, I will get to know them for the maybe first month or second month before the midterm of the first semester. So I know that this is where I'm going to change. That's where I look at it. And then if I see this is good, then I will use for the whole year. If not, then I will change. I'll keep using different instruction.
Yeah, well, I like that idea that you're attentive, you're vigilant about the fact that you might need to change it. I have found that for many students, probably grade 5 through grade 12, there are a lot of things we go, oh, this is working really well. And then 3 weeks later, it doesn't work for some reason. Maturity has changed, direction has changed. And so we do need to realize this student who used to operate this way 2 months ago is now operating this way. Oh, I need to take a look at that, rather than I will label you and classify you as this type of learner for the whole year. If you're aware of Mensa, the Society of Intellectuals, I think it qualifies you for Mensa Society to try to respond to all the student changes throughout the year. We can try to keep up best we can, but I really appreciate you saying, if I find more data that indicates I should go differently, I will change what I do mid-year. Go ahead, Bethany.
Mine is similar to Cindy's. I found that I had some fairly low readers, and I had one reading test just stressed her out. She would break out into tears.
Yes.
And so similar to Cindy, I started reading it out loud. Okay, follow along the test. I'm going to read the test to you, and I would read the questions and the multiple choice answers. As their reading improved, I then would read the excerpts and the questions. They would have to read the answers. And then as more time went, I would read the excerpts. They would have to read the questions and answers.
Yeah.
And then slowly they should be able to read the whole thing on their own. There's only one student, once I get everybody started, that I still sit individually with, and we still have to read the test together.
That is a lovely sequence of moving from dependence to independence. But I just got to tell you, secondary teachers could learn a lot from that. There are many, and when have taught high school or middle school or even college, where people don't read on grade level, and it's a math test. And so the word problem now is a test of reading comprehension more than of the mathematics applied in the service of solving the problem. So for some kids, I read the math problems out loud and just make sure, you want to diagram this? Let's make sure you understand what the question is asking. And once I make sure they've clarified, they know what the question is asking, all right, go back to your seat, you're fine. But that's a little bit of an adjustment I would need to make if I found out a child did not read on grade level and it was grade level text for the word problem. I love that. Thank you, Bethany. Debbie writes, she'll allow a student to dictate exam answers for a test on a novel. I typed, folks here playing scribe, and that's exactly what we need. And evaluated the complete exam later with the other exams. Absolutely, no worries there. And you just write it down verbatim. Any medium possible is fine. And you're not teaching the test format, you're teaching the evidence delivered via the vehicle, the format, the conveyance of the test itself. We don't give points for taking a test. We are recording points and proficiencies for evidence presented via the test. We'll talk more about that when we do grading as well. Anybody else want to add something to this list? Okay. So now, just ever so quickly, I'll need at least 2. If there's 3, then that was like gold mine. We hit the jackpot. But at least 2 connections between differentiation, responsive instruction, and motivation tenacity. In other words, why did I spend the entire first half of our time together talking about this segment of differentiated instruction, tiering, scaffolding, knowing the kids, responding accordingly as a part of a larger umbrella of building tenacity, perseverance, and motivation in students? How do they connect? Who's got one? And if you need to go back and look at the handout, that's fine. Think about it, and then let's hear from you. How is it motivating? That's basically what we're talking about. Any of these ideas?
If you're not responsive to the child, they're not going to be motivated.
What does that mean?
Well, whatever they need. Like one of my students is above grade level, and one of my students is 2 grade levels below. But you can't, if you're not responsive to that, then both of them could be unmotivated.
And what does responsive mean?
Teaching where they're at.
Right, as opposed to teaching above them or below them, they're going to become disinterested. And it's almost like you're disrespectful. You're dismissive of their unique nature. You're teaching blind to the students you serve. And that's not a very motivating thing. When students, remember the very basic element, the brain is out for self-preservation and survival of its own. And when you teach in a way they best learn, they are connected, they'll go along for the ride. But if you don't teach that way, they'll try to find a way to avoid. All right, any other connection that we need another person's resonance here? Thank you, Cindy, that was good.
I'll try.
All right, give it a shot, Bethany. You look so hopeful, like, Well,
I was just thinking, like today we actually were talking about plants and pollination. And so through the instruction, I try and use different tools. That way it catches different people in the group. So the first thing that we did is we went over notes that were student created about parts of a plant and everything. Then we actually went to another location, which I think helps break up getting out of the classroom, to where we actually had flowers. And then so we actually looked at a physical flower. Could they identify where the pollen was in the parts of the flower? And then we actually went to a video that talked about pollination before doing an assessment on parts of a plant and pollination. So I like trying to do different teaching techniques so I can try and motivate and grab the interest of different kids, those that might like their own hand-drawn notes and their own for those that are higher functioning. The other ones that need that visual, kinetic learning. So I can get everybody kind of in the same.
So
arena.
different media, different activities, but notice something about what you said. I think I'm interpreting this way, so correct me if I'm wrong. The whole class does, the whole class does, you know, the writing, the touching, the seeing the flower, the whole class watches the video, as opposed to those students I've identified who need that, they're the only ones who do that. So are you saying that you're differentiating kind of over the course of a sequence, but not really for separate groups, because the whole class does is not really differentiation, but maybe we could frame it as, well, over the course of the week, you will find a strong area where you can interact with the content.
With this assignment, it was more whole class.
Okay. There's not really
the,
differentiation.
yeah, with
but
the
you're
English, when I
mindful-
did the test
Yeah.
reading, that was only for certain groups.
Okay, fair. So yeah, you're just mindful of what you know about the kids, that some kids need this, some kids need this, and that's informing what you do. Yeah, awesome. Great idea. Debbie is writing, reaching out to students at their level, what they can do, and giving them an opportunity to grow and scaffold for the student. Nothing motivates like success. So if I'm teaching the way that you can find success, you're invested. Absolutely. Wonderful idea. If I don't teach the way that you find success, why invest? It's just more proof that you're weak, that you don't belong, and nobody's going to put up with that. I love this. This is great. Now, as those ideas percolate, we want to add something. Cognitive science, how the mind learns. And we're going to do kind of a part one, part two-ish here, but there's going to be more in next week when we talk about tools. But this is supposed to whet your appetite, get you going. If I come to you once again and I say, hey, what do we know about how the brain learns? And how is that expressed in your instructional design? I would expect you to speak up, because one of the biggest tools, perhaps the best, most effective tool you have as an educator, is your expertise in the human mind. But many teachers are like, I don't know, you know, usually if I have a visual, they remember it. Well, we need to go a little deeper than that. So what I want you to do is to think about an operational tenet, a principle of how the brain best learns and remembers things, moves things to long-term memory, and then what that would look like if I really respected that and I incorporated it in a lesson. So do you want an example, or do you have one already? Anybody want to try one? Okay, some people are like, I'm not sure. Here's one I'll give you as an example. One of the things we know from the world of cognitive science is that very little, if anything at all, goes into long-term memory, which is your ultimate testimony as a teacher, what they carry forward. Very little goes into long-term memory unless it's attached to something already in storage. So on Wednesday, I'm teaching something very important. You must learn it. But I understand that some students don't have a personal background with that material. There's nothing to which we can connect or anchor the new learning. So on Monday and Tuesday, I am building capacity for the successful learning on Wednesday. I will create prior knowledge experiences for this subset of students. So when I get to Wednesday, I don't have to differentiate. They can all really learn and carry it forward. If I didn't do that, I was blind to their background, I didn't know anything about them, there's that differentiation coming to the forefront again, then it'd be very easy for me to shake an admonishing finger at children and say, you didn't study, when I was really abdicating my educator role. I'm the one that knows how the brain best learns, and I should have created a connective prior knowledge before I taught that new thing. Does that make sense? Okay, so what did I do? I gave a principle. Very little goes into long-term memory unless it's attached to something already in storage. And then I suggested how I might work with that in a lesson. All right. Do you know any other operational principle about how the brain learns, and maybe a suggestion of what it would look like?
I'm not sure that this is what you're looking for.
But give it a shot and be the adventurer you are.
Okay. I teach my kids cursive handwriting.
Yeah.
For my dyslexic kids, they can't flip their letters if they're writing in cursive. But also when I was in middle school, I noticed that if they wrote their notes in cursive, they were able to remember more.
That's interesting. I have never heard of that.
Yeah, so I looked at some studies and they were saying that the correlation between your hand, your eye, and your brain is a circle. And every time you pick up your pencil or you type, you break that connection.
Oh, I see. So print, you'd be picking it up, or typing, it would be totally separate letters.
Yeah.
But the fluency of writing it. Well, you should pick it up when you go to the next word, but I do get your gist. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it did seem to make a difference for some of the kids, but especially the dyslexic kids, because then they couldn't flip their letters.
This is a great example.
Okay.
You got it. Spot on. We look at what we know about the brain and how does it inform what we do. We've got two, one for me, one from Cindy. Anybody else want to try? You don't have to. It's just if you want to.
Okay, I'll take a shot and see if this
All right, go for it.
fits. Second grade, we were teaching where the comma goes in a date.
Yes.
So we stood up and we would do hand motions to where it goes. State, comma, or city, comma, state. So we kind of made a cheer and they would have to remember it. And then I would come back maybe the next day and go, okay, where does a comma go with a state and a city? City, comma, state. We also did with the date.
You got it. In fact, I was going to mention movement associated with memory and a couple of more slides. So spot on. That's the cerebellum that's doing the most of that work there. You got it. That's exactly right. So well extended, adventured forth, just like Cindy, we got it. All right. So just to push ahead a little bit here, if you want to keep up, these are the go-to best places for the latest research. But I am warning you, these are the research articles. So you'll want to look at the limitations of the study, the abstract, the sample size, all the protocols, all of that. But it does give you a lot of fodder, catalyst, a lot to talk about. You just have to be comfortable with research writing in education. So if you don't already know about these, go visit these. These are really, really good. Now, ever so briefly, I told you it'd be 2 slides away. Here we are. So cerebrum up. What is up there in the upper part of the brain? This is Wernicke's area for language, corpus callosum, your thought, your memory, your personality, language acquisition, all that stuff. Got it? But cerebellum, bellum below. Got it? That's maybe a way to remember that. Mnemonics. Yeah. Well, what is housed there? Coordination, balance, movement. Wait for it, wait for it. 20 years ago, we discovered memory is stored there as well, in addition to the cerebrum. Who knew? And it was closely connected to movement. The idea that you would teach something like I teach mitosis through finger plays, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase. That doing that is actually a legit thing in the way the brain best learns. It's more than one access point. Every time you recall something, you're actually rebuilding the neural network. And the more connections we can have, the better remembered it is. So when I remember pecan pie in a restaurant from my college days, and I'm thinking of a real one that I used to go to, it's where I learned to love pecan pie. I'm mindful of the smell, the taste, the ambiance of the restaurant, conversations, friends and family I took there. I am all these different things. So as a consequence, the memory is very vivid, very accurate, and carried forward. The more access points we can, in a sense, plant in the brain. Brainstem, reptilian brain, medulla oblongata. This is, of course, all your automated stuff. Breathing, release of a lot of the hormones, heart rate, regulation of the temperature of the body, things like that. What are we excited about as educators? Well, I want you to look at the front half of the brain. Ready? Now, the front half of the front half. So the front quarter, this is the prefrontal cortex. We do our teacher happy dance. We love the prefrontal cortex right behind the forehead. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the brain develops from the back of the head forward. So the neurons in the back of the head are fully myelinated with the myelin sheath. And the myelin sheath that wraps around the axon is the thing that helps to conduct the sodium potassium ion pump that carries the impulse down the length of the axon through the dendrites across the synapse with neurotransmitters to the next neuron. So we love the myelin sheath. We want to really talk about it. I'll show you that in a minute. But what's in the prefrontal cortex that's so darn exciting? Well, let's take a look. Look at all those things. Is there anything there that would be important for school success? Hint, you should say all of them. Yeah, this is executive function. Decision-making, planning, distractibility controls, impulsivity controls, remembering the dates, starting an assignment the week it was assigned, not 5 weeks later, the night before it's due. All of that stuff, moral and abstract reasoning, being able to adapt to different changing situations, all of that is in that segment. When does it come online and is used very successfully? In most adults, it's late 20s, occasionally early 30s. Uh-oh, what ages do we teach? Younger than that. So it's going to be intermittent, right? Sporadic. And I'm going to do an entire section just on this in part 2. So don't worry about that, but it is something we like. And I want to remind you of something. You can say to me, I'm not a counselor. I'm not a psychologist. Don't bother me with the touchy-feely emotional stuff of learning. When you say that to me, I realize you are this close to educational malpractice. You know not what you do. Go back to teacher school, because we found that about 90, 95%, and maybe 96% in some studies, of everything that comes into the brain goes to emotional response centers first, not cognitive centers. So you can't leave the emotional atmosphere to chance. If a child is struggling with test anxiety, for example, or any other kind of anxiety, that has got to be addressed. You can't just say, well, persevere, compartmentalize, and deal with it. No, I've got to respond and give them the tools to navigate the strong emotions they're feeling. So yeah, get up to speed on the amygdala. The amygdala is the thing that encodes emotions for long-term memory via the hippocampus. The amygdala is the organelle for fight, flight, or freeze. We will see more of that when we talk about anxiety and panic a little bit later. But for right here, okay, help us activate it. One of the things that we have learned, I'll wait until I'm not frozen. All right, am I back? Am I not frozen anymore? Okay, good. Is this sequence, thanks for the thumbs up. Emotion drives attention, but attention drives learning. So what do we mean? We mean that you actually try to add emotional elements, components, to boring things you teach. So imagine I'm teaching bibliography, how to cite your sources properly. And students are like, oh, for older students, APA style or something like that. So what do? I plagiarize in front of children. And I've set it up where a passing adult will stop in just to visit and will actually see me claim something as my own words when really they're published by somebody else, and will accuse me and chew me out. I get red in the face and I say the defensive things students say back and forth. And often it's a student's parent I've called up and said, would you be willing to do this? And the poor child whose mom it is or dad, oh my God, mom, be quiet. Oh, Mr. Wormeli, I'm so sorry. They've never seen me in trouble, before like this. And I finally stop, and because the parent's going to storm out and contact the principal. And the students, at the height of the emotion, I say, have you had enough? And they're like, Huh? How much borrowing is too much borrowing? How do you cite your sources properly so this doesn't happen to you? Let's take a look at the 5 things you can do. And they're like, yeah, and they're writing it down and they realize it was a bit of a put on. But I have students come back from upper grade levels and they say, and college, and they say, I was sorely tempted to plagiarize. This is one little bit, but I remembered how mad I was at you on that one day for breaking the trust, for letting us down. And I swore I would never do that. And so I decided not to do it. For me, touchdown. I tried to make it vivid and they were learning vicariously through my discomfort and the blow to my trust or my reputation as an honest educator standing in front of them. On another occasion, I was taking adrenaline, cortisol, adrenal glands, and so on. And what I did is I had a box and it said Reggie in quotes and it had air holes in it. So the idea was that there was a snake named Reggie in the box. Now, that was named after the snake in Raiders of the Lost Ark in the opening sequence, if you ever saw that. So I brought it in, I say, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna reach in, I'm gonna pull out Reggie, or my pet snake I brought from home, and I'm gonna hand him to you, and I just want you to hand him down the row, and the desk clusters, and turn them over, look at the adrenal glands. Do snakes have adrenal glands? I don't think so, but they don't know that. And then just look at it and pass it on to the next person. And the students in the class were like, what the what, huh? Yeah, I want you to pass the snake on. Okay. So I reached my hand in and I'm like, okay, Reggie, these are very nice children. Let's be very calm. Let's not upset them. Whew. Reggie. Oh, Reggie, you don't want to be irritating. You don't want to be cranky. These are nice children. Class, I don't want you to get bitten by Reggie. Would it be okay if I just held the box and you looked inside? And the class is like, well, if you have to, but some of them are lifting up a prayer of thank you. All right, so I say, fine. And I start walking towards their desk. And of course, you know what I do. I trip and I hold onto the box, but inside the box is a rubber, twisty-turny snake. It's not alive, but I'm holding the box and the snake comes out flying through the air, wiggling in the air, and they've been led to believe. Have you ever seen the flying monkeys in The Wizard of Oz? They've got nothing on flying serpents in any age classroom. There's this mad dash vacuum to the walls as the kids get out of their seats, and the accompanying bladder issues. And then I say, oh, look, it's just a rubber snake. And I'm tying it in a knot like this. Look, now take notes on this stuff. Start writing stuff down. Try to draw a circle. And see how jagged that is? That's adrenaline, man. Feel that? Yeah. Now keep drawing the circles. And slowly the circle or the handwriting, the cursive will smooth out. Now it's ebbing. Now it's disappearing because it was fight or flight. And they are all in. Problem. In either one of those scenarios, too much emotion can paralyze cognition if you cross the line. So you need to know your students. There are some of my students who really would get upset by surprises. And so what I do is I rehearse with them the day before or the day of, how might we respond to this when it happens? And I tell them the whole thing, I lay it out. So I'm very clear and honest. And we say, all right, here comes the snake. Blah. What are we gonna do to cope with that so it's not upsetting? How to respond? And that helps. But I will remind you that anything that's a little bit sawdust, boring, you might want to consider, how do I raise the stakes with this and the motivation by adding an emotional element, like fighting for a cause, something that is unfair. They're going to be all in, right? So think about that. Any questions about that? All right. What are we doing right now? We're giving you a taste of the world of cognitive science. Prime 1, Prime 2, also known as primacy recency, works like this. This is the way most teachers teach. They do announcements as students enter the class. They collect homework. They maybe have early bird, daily oral language, warm-up activities. And then they really teach the stuff. Then at the very end of class, they have the students clean up the last few minutes. Or we finished early. You may talk amongst yourselves before we move to the next segment. Or, hey, we finished 7 minutes early. Let's get that homework out and start, on tonight's homework. That kind of thing. Here's the problem. Here is what the brain best remembers. So if the front end or the back end. So if I taught like this, what'd you learn in school today? The child would say, Jennifer was absent. I missed 4 on the homework, and there's no basketball Friday because there's a teacher meeting. No. But what'd you learn about area versus perimeter? Oh, I don't know. Because they only remember the clerical stuff in the front and the back end. Where do you put your strongest arguments in a persuasive essay? First thing and last thing. In a political speech, first point and last point. The stuff in the middle is just not well remembered. So that means that your early bird, your warm-up stuff, if you're teaching something new, should be about the new material. If it's just a review day, then it can be about the review material. But look now at the right side. You need to have courage of conviction that even though you didn't get to the nth degree of curriculum, you really needed to get to that point in the curriculum, but it just took longer than you thought. You were still thinking this. It's not about what I present. It's about what they carry forward. Okay, have the courage, pedagogical courage. I'm going to stop in time, and we're at least going to summarize, process, revisit what we did do. Even though in the last 7 minutes or 10 minutes, I could have fit it all in. It's not about what I got through. It's what they carry forward. Oh, well, what if I had a 75-minute or 90-minute block of time? Like teaching in a block schedule or in an elementary time where I have language arts for 90 minutes or whatever it is. Do I only teach the first 10 minutes and the last 10 minutes I review? 70 is a vast wasteland? No. I could have 3 cycles of about 28 minutes each, beginning, middle, and end. Beginning, middle, and end. Beginning, middle, and end. In between them, a break. We exercise just for pure fun. We do a puzzle. We shift gears, and then we start a new learning cycle. Oh, so I could triple the primacy, recency, effectiveness. If I have just a 50 or 60 minute period, I would do like a 25, 28 minute segment, but 2 of them with a break in the middle. The idea is that we don't just plow through the whole thing as one big lesson plan. We break it up because we want to improve the actual retention of what we do. Any questions about primacy, recency? Okay. Not seeing anything in the chat box and not seeing anything unmuted. Let's try another one. As promised, the myelin sheath. So that's that hot dog bun stuff wrapped around the axon. It takes certain fats, certain proteins, but the biggest thing that really helps, water, hydration. So let's just think about it for a minute. I did this massive scientific survey of 5 people, and they were Greyhound and Trailways bus drivers, okay? And I asked them, how do you stay awake in your 8, 9, and 10-hour cross-country hauls? You're driving. A lot of coffee and tea, and they said, no, it's a diuretic. No, a piece of fruit and water every hour. Whoa, well, I tried that. I used to drink a couple of cans of Coke, and I'd have a stack of papers and projects to grade. And within 30 minutes, I was asleep with the imprint of spiral notebook on my cheek. And I would have drunkenly, really, it felt like it, like I'm slurring my speech, circled like an entire page of math problems, or maybe students writing, and said, define more precisely, or rethink this. And truly, what does alcohol do to neural tissue of the brain? It sucks the water right out. What are the characteristics of somebody who's drunk or inebriated? They don't think too clearly. What they say isn't related to what we're talking about. They're kind of depressed. They don't make very good company. They're not very motivated by stuff. I've just described my students if they've had nothing to drink since last night's dinner, or they just came in from PE, or they're not drinking enough throughout the day. Please remember that student metabolism, high school, middle school, elementary, primary, doesn't matter. is higher than an adult. And their need for hydration is more than ours, even though we need it too. If you wait until you're thirsty, you've probably waited too long. So we want them drinking. In every class, we want bottles of water or a water fountain. We want students to drink as much as they want. And of course, we talked about this before, eat protein, complex carbohydrates, not sugary snacks, but fruits, vegetables, maybe half a sandwich, water, yes, as much as possible. In Virginia, all new schools have to have water fountains in the classroom. We believe in this so much. And frankly, I'm saying this, if you water them, they will grow. Well, what happens when, it's kind of like Chauncey Gardner in the movie Being There, if you ever saw that movie. But what I have found is I've seen students who are unmotivated, depressed, kind of slouching, going, this is so dumb, right? And I've had them drink like 2 or 3 cups of water, and suddenly, what? They're participating in class, they're answering questions, they're on topic. And all it took was watering them, is the hydration. So it's one more of the many elements that kind of intersect with, hey, cognitive science, how does the brain learn? Now, a lot of you may or may not be aware of cognitive load theory. It's something that we need to be studying, consider. But one of the things we found is that we have working memory, which is where most students work, working memory, not so much long-term or short-term memory, but working memory when they're in the act of instruction, just so you know. All right. And usually it's about 2 or 3 really good laser focused things at one time that they can kind of create a synergy or analyze, breaking apart, whatever it is. If you pile on 5, 6, 7 things within that working memory time, they lose most of it and they don't carry it forward. And of course, we want them to carry it forward and do a deeper dive. So there's some ideas there you see on the screen. Well, you might remember George Miller and his research, because everybody's curious about this. Why are telephone numbers only 7 digits? Because in his research, that's the most number of things unrelated to each other that a human can basically remember, give or take 2. So that's always 7 plus or minus 2. So some people could do 9 things out of sequence, some can do 5, whatever it is, but roughly it's about 7. You remember the area code and the country code separately from the actual number itself. So you're dividing up into chunks. So what we found is with adults and high school students, you want to lecture, you want to design your lesson in 7s or less. So here are the 5 components. Here are the 6 steps. Here are the 7 categories, that kind of thing. But for middle school and upper elementary, 5s or less. And for some students, you've got that plus or minus 2. For very young students, we want to do the, what are 2 things we can learn about our police officer today? Or what are 3 things we know about clouds? That kind of thing. And we kind of operate in that world. We don't, we have to realize that experts always think in chunks, relationships, and patterns, right? Novices keep things individual, discrete pieces. And we are moving children to the best we can from being that early beginner to being at least sort of a mini expert in something. So yes, we'll focus on these 2 to 3 things, but we always have to spend time on the connection in the larger context after that. So yes, have laser focused direct instruction, but have them always pull the camera lens back and see how this causes that. This connects, this builds upon that, or is the support for that? How does it fit in the overall schematic? That's still that. Now, a big part of this, and there's been an explosion of publications on this. Okay, am I back? Can you see me moving? Okay, good, thank you. I keep getting this notice, internet is unstable, and I thought, oh, I'm just frozen to them. So I apologize for asking that all the time. Retrieval practice has exploded. And there's a wonderful website I'm gonna direct you to go visit. You'll thank me later. It's called retrievalpractice.org. It's written at the bottom of the screen. But one of the things we wanna do is we wanna make students rehearsal and practice with all this content really effective and improving learning every time they practice. What can happen is that people do practice and rehearsal incorrectly, and it's actually really negative. It comes across as drudgery, and you don't improve learning with each practice. So just a taste, take a look at this. Masked or block practice doesn't work. So don't get too used to it, all right? What does that mean? Well, imagine I'm learning to throw a ball, and I keep throwing a ball, and you give me coaching, and we keep throwing a ball, and I get to the point where I'm on automatic pilot. I get complacent, indifferent. So another day or two down the road, when you say practice throwing the ball, and I'm doing it for 10 minutes, whatever it is, I'm not concentrating. I'm not really getting the gain, the benefit. I'm just going through muscle memory. It's not helping. But when you do interleaving of practice, it turns out the students learn more solidly all the different dexterities, the flexibilities, and the real content. So for example, math class, I'm not going to have you do 10 problems where you add fractions, 10 problems where you subtract, 10 problems where you multiply, 10 problems where you divide. I'm going to mix it up. So first problem, maybe 2 problems in a row, add fractions. Next problem, divide 2 mixed numbers, which means you have to turn them into improper and all of that. Next one, subtract fractions, different denominators. Next one, multiply. Oh, then we're back to adding again. I'm going to mix it up because it forces you to shift gears and think more attentively about what you're doing. You improve, you maximize the effect, the impact of that practice. Does that make sense? All right. A part of this, though, is getting successively more or longer intervals between each practice. So I might have you learn something and you practice it a little bit right here, right now. We go on and do something else. Maybe it's artistic, maybe it's a social conversation, but 10 or 15 minutes later, you go back and you practice it again. That was like really short. But then maybe it's later in the day, a few hours later. And then it's tomorrow. And then I let 2 or 3 days go by. Oh, then we spiral back and we do it again. We're increasing the intervals. This is the kind of stuff you get from retrievalpractice.org. But I want to remind you, every time you're asking a student to remember something, you are literally relearning the material from these different elements. You're redigging the neural pathways and you know it better. So for a lot of us, I could probably say, what was your childhood phone number? And you probably remember it because you had to punch it in a lot. Although today, maybe you don't, because all you do is press one button and it automatically dialed. But in my day, we would do that. Certain things you referenced over and over, maybe it's social security number, you've got that. But if you really didn't spend any time recalling it over intervals and interleaving, then you don't remember it nearly as well. Well, the booklet on the left is only like, 25 pages or something, and it's free. And there's all kinds of practical tips. It's at retrievalpractice.org. Download it right away. You'll thank me later. The book in the middle just came out last year, and it's a whole book dedicated to retrieval practice by the authors of retrievalpractice.org. And it presents the research as well as the practicality. The book to the right came out about 5-6 years ago. And when it came out, Doug Reeves and several others said, oh my gosh, this is going to make people so mad. And we said, why? Because it was a lot of this same stuff from retrievalpractice.org. It was the science behind it and the practicality. And it made people realize the way we've been doing classwork and homework has been dramatically wrong. And when you do it this way, kids are more motivated, they learn it better. And it's a tool for life, lifelong learning. And we're going to feel like we want to call our former students and apologize. Come back and do ancient Egypt. I know how to do it now. Well, we can't, but we can pay it forward to the students we currently serve and subsequent generations. So I'm going to ask you to give strong consideration to changing how students practice their work. And this would be a launching pad for you. Now, I know this sounds weird. We have overwhelming research that getting oxygen and nutrients to the cognitive centers of the brain, which happens quite often through exercise, elevated heart rate, right? And all that happens with team sports, individual sports, dance, exercise, all of that is actually more impactful than a heck of a lot of sleepy worksheets we could ever do. So in language arts programs, elementary, middle, and high school, in my science classes, in my history classes, it doesn't matter. I have literally said, your homework tonight, play basketball for an hour or soccer, your choice. What? That's your math homework. You have to play soccer for at least an hour. You have to ride your bike 10 miles or more. Go. What? And the parents are calling me, are you telling my child? Yeah, because I'll get more out of them the rest of the week for the exercise and getting the heart rate up there than I will having them read something and answer a few questions. So please consider it. Well, we're going to visit this again when we talk about executive function. But if you notice down below, brilliant, the new science of smart 2013, a PBS show. This is proven over and over. Students and adults, this is stuff that improves your capacity to plan, to deal with distractibility, impulsivity, but also to learn mathematics, to learn science, to learn history, and so on. So it's one of those elements. And if you've got some students who they already have like a swim team, they're already on a soccer team, they're in a PE program that's very, very physically engaging, you don't need to worry about this as much. But if not, take a look at these three possibilities. And Bethany, as we just saw demonstrated earlier this evening, is already well on her way with teaching punctuation dance moves. We can do it. All right. Any questions about this? All right. Let's keep on going. We've got about 25 minutes left, but I'm willing to stop and like re-examine something as we're moving forward. One of the coolest things to do is to prime the brain. Priming the brain has two parts. One, I'm going to give you the roadmap, the itinerary. You're going to be needing a protractor for this, or the TI 84, 85, 86, or whatever new graphing calculator is present. You're going to need these tools. Here you're going to encounter this. I'm giving you the itinerary. Second way of priming the brain, we set purpose. Why are we doing this? What are we seeking as we do this? So it's kind of like when you set purpose before you assign a reading. We're reading to find out. Well, check this out. I've taken my kids to the Air and Space Museum here in DC. All right. We're on the bus and I say, all right, just take notes on everything the docent says. We'll summarize and hear what you have to say on the bus ride back to school. What will happen with the kids or in the Air and Space Museum? They're wandering around kind of listlessly, right? Because maybe they've seen it before, I don't know. But they're kind of like, this is so lame, man. And their feet are getting tired and they're cranky and complaining. And the docents say, your kids really weren't into this. But wait a minute. What if I prime the brain? Ladies and gentlemen, when we arrive, we're going to go to the IMAX theater and we're going to see the 45-minute film on flight principles. Specifically in that film, you will see these topics. Maybe I hand it to them or I tell them about it. Then I have a crate. And in that crate is a whole bunch of weird assorted objects. You're going to be having this crate and you will only be allowed to use these tools. At the end of the tour, you're going to be asked to create a flying machine that demonstrates at least two of the flight principles you've been taught. Now, in between, after the film, I've hired retired or currently serving airline pilots to take you through the whole museum and point out the different principles with the different flying machines. So air as mass, air as liquid, propulsion, thrust, lift, Bernoulli's principle, air pressure, and if it goes down or up, and all these different things. You're going to experience all of that with the airline pilot. So what are the three parts? Film with all these principles. Tour with an airline pilot looking at the flight principles. 3, creating the flying machine. So we're very clear on what they're seeking, right? So while the airline pilot is talking, they're taking notes, but they know what to elevate as salient. They know what the brain is primed to seek. Well, it turns out in the world of cognitive science, when you prime the brain, kids remember it dramatically longer and they're way more invested in the learning. Everything is triggered. Oh, that's one of the things that what adds that. We can use that. And they're writing it down. They're all in. If I never primed the brain for what we're about to visit, it's really just lump of coal behavior. I've also done this. We're going to a historical museum or someplace that's historical reverence of some sort. And they're walking through and they're taking notes and reading the little display cards. It's almost like a Finds Waldo treasure hunt. It's sort of engaging, but not really, because they're just filling out a chart. They won't remember it. But what if I did this? What if I tell the story behind every one of the exhibits? The personalized story, created the picture, the narrative, what was going on. Now we arrive at the museum or the historical era, and students come up to me and do this. Mr. Wormeli, is this the original one you were talking about back in the classroom? The one? Yes, it is, Junior. Oh, are we allowed to touch it? Humans are weird. We like to touch something historical and think that we transform back, that we're literally connecting with the famous person because we touched a thing that was cleaned 1,000 times and has no detritus or skin cells from that person, but nonetheless, it feels like we're touching them. 1 degree of separation, by golly, maybe 2. Yeah, we like doing that. But I had to tell the story behind it before it became meaningful to you, and you got suddenly very excited. Absent that, you really don't care. You're kind of oblivious, and everything is above you, and you're not going to engage in what's going on. One of the things that kind of speaks to that is I wrote an article about why it's so powerfully important we have kids memorize, even in a world in which you can still look things up. If nothing is in long-term storage, right, then you're reading something new, you're experiencing a new learning experience, it doesn't connect with what's in there. So my students have to memorize swaths of literature, the 5 protections under the First Amendment, if I'm teaching the Bill of Rights, they memorize stuff. And then when we're in the moment having a debate, they can pull upon that right there instead of having to shuffle through all their notes looking for things. They're way more excited and involved when they have the competence. I convince them of their own competencies. You might remember this from yesterday. They have it at their fingertips, they're in. If they don't have it, it's just too much energy. And they don't want to engage because they might get it wrong. So I'm going to tell you, for the learning capacity, for the motivational outcome, having kids memorize, gold. So if you want techniques for teaching memorization, or you want that rationale, ask me for the article if it's not already on the list. I don't know if I put it on the list or not, but I will be glad to send it to you. No worries at all. Then you might remember, we talked a little bit about this. There is a way higher level of understanding abstract, mature, sophisticated things when it's read aloud, as opposed to when you have to read it silently by yourself, cold. I want the vocal inflection by somebody who respects the punctuation, who knows what they're talking about, is kind of really interested in, maybe enthusiastic about it. I can really participate. So just think about this. You got a kid who's glum. He doesn't read on grade level. Oh man, this just stinks. This is gonna be such a boring class. What he's really saying is, I'm gonna have more and more proof that I'm a fake. I don't want people to find out. So I'm not gonna engage. And it comes across as, I'm not motivated, I don't care. No, it's me just trying to survive and cope and not have anybody find out. But I've got kids who could do things on grade level or above if the reading that was esoteric, that was sophisticated, was actually shared with them before orally. And a lot of textbook companies will provide their textbooks with audio files. There are professional actors who will read things. I have older students or college students or retirees who like to record this stuff for students in my class. It's a service project. It's very easy to do. Or I get into it and I read the thing, whatever it is. Then in their headphones, they can be a part of the small group or the class discussion without feeling like everybody thinks they're dead weight and judging them as a kid who can't read and doesn't know anything. They're suddenly very motivated because I just changed an avenue for them to have access. And now when I do a grade, I'm not grading you based on, do you read at grade level? You totally know this advanced stuff. but I'm going to teach you how to read in grade level as a way to give you success as well. But you can totally participate and you're far more motivated because you perceive you have the competencies. And look at that bottom note. When kids have clarity and they understand what they're learning, they're way more likely to persevere and develop tenacity. The stick-to-itiveness, if they don't have the sense I'm competent in this, I know what's going on, they'll back off. And the tenacity, you can yell until you're blue in the face or cajole or try to implore, it's not going to happen. Any questions on this? Okay. So what did I say to you before? A whole bunch more tools are going to be happening, or excuse me, cognitive science principles are going to be happening in the tools section. Just want you to remember that. Okay. So just take a moment. Anything I've said in the world of how the brain learns, remember the very first thing we did? It was a diagram of the brain and the cerebrum and the prefrontal cortex, right? All the way to here. Can anybody make a connection? Draw the line between knowing about cognitive science, how the mind learns, and students' motivation. This is Fraser Creighton. I'm listening. Who's got one connection they can make? Don't be bashful. Chat box or unmute. You can look at the slides if you need to. You can look at any slide and you can say, how does that connect to students being more tenacious and motivated? That's all I'm asking you. By the way, wait time is a cognitive science principle, and usually it's 10 seconds or more. Most American teachers wait 0.2 to 2.0 seconds, and it's not respectful to students, and they don't come up with a robust response. American society is uncomfortable with silence. So I'm going to suggest you get comfortable with silence and don't think you're ruining momentum. Go ahead and wait them out. All right, let's take a look at what we've got. Debbie writes, reaching out to students at their level. Okay, giving opportunity of scaffold. Always point out patterns. Yes, they're seeking connection. That's really inviting to kids, very compelling. And even with young kids, which one of these is not like the others? We are really into pattern seeking or anomalies within a pattern. So that's a huge, wonderful engagement tool. Students get very excited when they see a pattern that others have not, and this motivates them to keep finding patterns. I love that, Debbie. You're exactly right. Chunking in 5 or less. So I'm now going to work with my students. What are 4 things we blah, blah, blah? 3 steps of blah, blah, blah. Absolutely. Because that's teaching the brain and mind. Now, I said make the connection. So I'm going to ask you, as you're saying that, anybody could do this. Why is that so motivating? Chunking in 5 or less, or pointing out patterns. You want to explain what's the connection to motivation or perseverance, engagement. Anybody have a little twist on that? Or an offer? If you remember, you are excited. Nothing motivates like success. It was mentioned earlier by Debbie that we crave competence. And when we don't have the competence, we kind of avoid and we pull back. So if you remember, you know stuff, you're going to dive in. You have that competence / confidence to kind of spring forward. Anybody else have one? A connection? If I speak in 5 or less for the kids where that's developmentally appropriate, they're really going to remember it and they're going to engage. If I say, here are 9 things, here are 12 things, it's going to be overwhelming and they're going to self-preserve. They're going to avoid. So we've got a connection between motivation and cognitive science ideas. Anybody else have one? You want to make a connection? All right. Priming the brain will be more successful in learning. Yeah. You create that anticipatory set that Madeline Hunter talked about so much. I'm building your capacity for the learning. Debbie writes, the connection to engagement is that the brain loves patterns and will make a pattern even where there isn't one. Nixon in the grilled cheese. You want to explain that one, Debbie? Debbie's audio is acting up yesterday, so she'll be typing out an answer. Practice the topic in different ways, interleave practicing. How is that motivating? Remember, we're trying to make the connection, Bethany. So how is interleaving your practice motivating to kids? Sometimes people see images because their brains perceive a partial silhouette that looks familiar. So there's Nixon in a cheese curl or grilled cheese. Why we see the rock formation on Mars, it looks like a human face. We tend to see those things that are familiar. Absolutely. See images because the brains perceive a partial silhouette looks familiar. Makes it fresh and fun. Yeah, you guys got it. This is great. Well, the part 2 of all this is meaning making. So we'll get a running start and then we'll say goodbye in about 8 or 9 minutes. Meaning making, so many teachers stop at sense making. Here are the parts of this. Here are the steps of that. Here's the subject and the predicate. Here's what a transitive verb is. Here's an intransitive verb. Okay, we're clear, move on. And they don't do the meaning making, and the meaning making is actually where there's the most motivation. So I'm going to ask you, as a subset of cognitive science, you take a look at meaning making. So toward that end, I'm going to put some photos up. I want you to decide whether or not you think they're meaningful. Okay, this is good that we're building capacity for something we're going to do next. But take a look at this first photo. Is that meaningful? What makes something meaningful? I don't know. That's kind of abstract. Let's try this one. Is that meaningful? Well, if you are a member of or know somebody in the LGBTQA community, yeah, that might be very meaningful. It may not be meaningful. It might just be colorful and remind you of hung laundry or flying kites or something. That could be meaningful. Try this one. Is that meaningful in today's society? Maybe. Yeah, Deb. How about that one? Lower right-hand corner. Well, it looks delicious. Is it meaningful? Oh, Debbie. Well, it might be because you love bread baking. It reminds you of a relative that used to do that. The smells, the places you associate with that, your own kinesthesiology, the movement as you make the breads. I look at that and I'm like, I'm all in as I look at that. And by the way, could I have a piece? Send it my way. Yeah, you can smell it just like absolutely. Let's try this one. Is this photo, is this woman meaningful to you? Their dress, her culture, nationality? How about this one? Is that meaningful? This one? My father or my mother maybe passed away last year, and we used to get coffee like this every Saturday, and I really do miss them. That might be meaningful. It could be, you know what? Every morning, this is what I pick up for me and my colleagues. So it just kind of reminds me of the drudgery of the work commute. Or maybe just totally boring and I don't really have any connection at all. How about that one? Oh, look at you, Bethany, like a cartoon character. But wait a minute. There are some people look at that and go, oh, I am all in. That is awesome. Let's talk about it. And there are others of us, I am with you, Bethany, are like, I don't think so. I recognize a few of those formulas, but not all of them. So I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, this is going to be so hard. I might as well start coping now with my boredom. So I really want us to think just for a moment, what makes something meaningful to any one person? Can you kind of identify that in the chat box or unmute? How do we know this is meaningful, this is not? What are the characteristics or the elements?
I think it's your connection to the picture. What kind of emotions, like the math, I got anxiety just looking at all that math.
Sure, yeah. Well, so previous experience, as Cindy mentions, spot on, but also the emotion. So connotation, not just denotation. You know, the things you associate with that will have resonance or not. When something is meaningful, a person is a personal connection to it. It brings up memories, previous experiences. Debbie's exactly right. It's those kinds of things. Now, something meaningful to one may not be meaningful to another. So from the world of the differentiation that we did, I would have to know you so well to decide what was meaningful to you as you do that. Otherwise, again, I'm teaching blind and I'm not going to motivate you unless I know what rocks your world. Or not rocks it, but what rocks your boat. I don't know. What gets you engaged, what ignites you, it gets you going. That's what I want to be able to do. So Disney and cats, laugh out loud, Bethany. Yeah, absolutely. So Mephistopheles would say, or Tum Tum Tiger, is that it? I would say, what would it be? And of course, when I hear memory, like sobbing, because I've seen cats twice. And at that moment, I'm like, oh no, here it comes, here it comes. I'm still gonna, or 1983, I know some of you weren't alive, just go home now. But anyway, 1983, E.T. lifting the finger up and saying to Elliot, I'll be right here. I'm crushed. For the rest of the afternoon, I'm like, oh, gosh, you know, such a sad thing. But that's meaningful to me. And I was actually running a summer camp, and we took all the kids to the camp to see E.T. We drove into the city from the countryside wilderness just to do that. And I'm sobbing, and all the campers like, Rick, Mr. Rick, why are you so sad? And no, I'm happy. I'm just so, you know, anyway, it was just amazing. But yeah, what is the meaningful thing? So I'm teaching commas. Here's how I make it meaningful. Have a smile. Or you might be familiar with this one. So I'm about to teach you what is a verb. And what we do is we have conversations without using verbs. And by a verb, I mean any action word or form of to be. Is, am, were, was, seems, are, that kind of thing. And what the students start doing is they sound like old Tarzan movies. Me, Pop-Tarts, good. Mr. Wormeli, I sound foolish. Teach me verbs. They didn't realize the power of verbs until they tried to work without them. That's the moment. We've got them. Some of you know the Socrates quote, all thinking begins with wonder. And that means that if I want students to think, I have to create a sense of wonder. But you might be thinking, I don't have time to create wonder in every lesson I do. What you're saying is, I don't have time to teach well. But what you can do is do it most of the time. Can I create a sense of curiosity, a sense of wonder as we do this? Hang was talking about making mistakes are okay as we do this. Perhaps as we're looking back at, you know, what is meaningful to them, yes, or some of the things that we've learned and the connections with the cognitive science and what we know about the motivation. Yeah, it's a safe place for me to make mistakes, to wrestle, and it's not held against me. It's not high stakes. So I look at this and I tell everybody I know, seriously, you give me paints of this color, markers, crayons, I could totally draw a whole bunch of these for you. I used to doodle just like this when I was in school myself. That's true, actually. So I don't get why this is worth millions of dollars and think this is all really intelligent, this Van Gogh painting, Van Gogh in Amsterdam. I've actually visited the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, right? I don't get it. And then a curator comes over and tells me the story and says, can I tell you about the provenance of this painting, the technique of the artist, or about the artist himself or herself? And my jaw hits the floor. Like, that is so amazing. Do you have a book of these prints? Can I have one in my office? Do you have a little statue of this sculpture I can put on my desk as inspirational muse as I create things? I'm all agog. I get it now. It's like watching an opera and you don't speak Italian and the whole thing's in Italian. And you're sitting there looking at everybody in the room and they're all crying at this one part and you go, I don't get it. And then they explain the story. He just killed his lover, but he mistook the lover for somebody else that was a traitor and didn't know it was his lover because she was in costume and then I realized I go, oh my God, that's terrible. And now I'm all in. I get the opera. But if I don't have that background, I'm not in. When I teach Shakespeare, I always tell the exact story in very plain English, what's going on. And then we read the play and they're so amazed by the intelligence, the brilliance, the wordplay. They're all motivated. But if I said, please now read, scene such and such by tomorrow, because we're going to talk about it, it dies. Shakespeare himself said, my plays should never be read silently. They should only be performed orally out loud. You ruin it when you read it silently. And I've taken that to heart. Oh, so we're going to talk a heck of a lot more about meaning making, agency, and so much more when we come back next week. Hope you got something today you can carry it forward. Don't forget, what did we say yesterday? How are you going to process this stuff? How are you going to own it instead of just letting it sit here and you never re-interact with it between now and next week? I'm hoping you'll figure out a way to do that. I'll be glad to brainstorm some possibilities. Thank you for your time. When we return, would you please make sure you've marked this? This is the slide. I'll put a little notation here myself, but this is the slide where we'll pick up. Thanks so much. Enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.